righty. Thank you for coming today. We have Elisabeth Pickle, who will be talking about specifically planning for your pet in the estate. I'm going to leave Lana on pin, so they'll be up and talking back and forth. If you have any questions throughout, put them in the chat. I'll be looking at that, and we can ask that towards the end. And yeah, let's get going.
So good evening, everybody. My name is Lana Shapiro. I'm the Director of Development for Foothills Animal Rescue, and we are pleased to welcome Elisabeth Pickle, who has been so kind to help us out with discussing the topic of pet planning. And pets are what we do at Foothills Animal Rescue, but we just thought it would be a great opportunity for Elisabeth to talk to people who are affiliated with Foothills Animal Rescue or just our supporters in general about what it takes to plan for your pet through your estate and through estate planning. So I'm going to hand it off to you.
Great. Thank you so very much. Thank you all for coming this afternoon, early evening. My name is Elisabeth Pickle, and I have been blessed to be an estate planning attorney for over 20 years, and truly, truly grateful that I get to do this work and service families, businesses, and clients in Arizona and sometimes around the nation. And pet planning is near and dear to my heart. For some of us, our fur babies are our children. And I want you to ignore the gentleman walking in the background, first of all. I'm in my home office this evening. But it is very important to understand that we have many options to plan for our pets. And so the first thing that I want to do is attempt to screen share this beautiful slideshow that my assistant created for me this evening. I'm just an attorney. I don't do creative slideshows, so it's just host disabled participant screen sharing. So is there any way, Emily, we might be able to?
Yes, hold on.
No problem, no problem.
I'm gonna do this and try now, see if it'll let you now.
And there we go. Okay.
Perfect.
See. Audience window, share. Is this going to work? Okay. So, are we seeing the slideshow on deck here?
Yeah, looks great.
You can? Okay,
Yes.
Fantastic. Great. Okay. So I also want to say that this is going to be a rather short and sweet presentation. A traditional estate planning webinar is close to an hour, and it's just not necessary with pet planning. Pet planning is a part and parcel of usually a larger estate plan. So tonight I want to focus on protecting your non-human family members. So we're going to talk about estate planning for pets, not so much estate planning for our spouses or our children or our business, but we're going to focus on pets. And so I will chat at you for about 20 minutes and then would be more than happy to answer any questions that you have. And so our practice is called Mindful Counsel. And we offer estate planning services. We do small business law, corporate law, and we also do intellectual property, which includes trademarks, copyrights, and patents. And what we focus on are protecting your assets. Everyone and everything that you love should be protected with a fortress. You've worked very hard your entire life to accumulate certain assets, and you want to make sure that you have a plan in place so that all of your assets and your children and your pets are taken care of, and that the state of Arizona does not make those decisions for you. So these are the types of legal services that we focus on. We don't do divorce. We don't do criminal law. We focus on the real feel good. I think it's feel good. Some people would say death and dying is not so feel good, but in my perspective, it is, because we're protecting and we're planning for our families. And so we offer we sometimes offer mindful legal chats while we hike in the desert. We haven't done that lately because, you know, need I say more? Right now we're doing a coffee house series. And so if you follow us on social media, you'll see that every other week we're at a coffee house, and you can show up and sit down and have coffee with me and ask me all kinds of questions about estate planning. Just thought I'd put that out there for you. So let's talk a little bit about caring for your pet in your estate plan. And you may be familiar with the term trust, and in particular, the pet trust. Now, I don't want you to get too worried or worked up over that word trust, okay? The trust is not just for the Kennedys or for celebrities or for the super uber wealthy. It is for anyone or any family who wants to have some type of a control over how your assets move to your family, your loved ones, and your pets. So many people will come to me and we'll sit down in a consultation, and they'll say, Liz, I have 2 cats. Do I need a pet trust? Probably not. Probably not. But in some cases, you may want to consider the trust, and we'll talk about what those reasons are. So your estate plan should always include care for your pets, even if it's a very basic plan or a more complex plan. The pet trust is a legally enforceable structure with multiple players, ensuring that your trust fund money is being put towards the well-being of your pet. So when you leave money in a trust for your pet, it will be for that purpose and not any other purpose. Okay, so if we leave, for instance, if we leave somebody, let's say, $5,000 to care for our cats, if we just give them $5,000, that's an outright gift, and they can do what they want with that money. But if we put it in a trust, now the trust controls the distribution for the pet. So trusts are definitely a little fancier than leaving an outright gift, but they make a lot more sense in many situations. We are allowed to create pet trusts under Arizona law. In fact, all 50 states have pet trust laws, but it wasn't always that way. Way back in the day, states had the feeling, the impression, the point of view that a trust could not be created for a pet because the pet, as the beneficiary of the trust, is not a human being that could enforce the trust. So for instance, if you leave your money to your kids in a trust, your kids can force that trustee to make distributions. But a cat or a dog, they can't force that. However, over the years, the states have come to realize that the trustee can distribute assets on the behalf of a pet beneficiary, and hence the laws are now in effect. So these are the 2 laws that allow us to create the pet trusts here in Arizona. There are 2 statutes. You can take a look at those if you have interest, and the statutes are very specific as to how we create the trust, that the trust has to have a purpose, the trust has to have a trustee, beneficiaries, and caretakers. And we'll talk a little bit more about those roles in the trust. So when we establish the trust, you are called the settlor. We also use the term grantor. So those are the 2 words that you'll see if you ever set up a pet trust. You'll see that you are the creator of the trust and you are called the settlor or the grantor. And then you will talk with your estate planning attorney about your wishes and your goals for your pet's care. And you and your attorney will decide how to fund the trust, how much money to put into the trust, and who, first of all, is going to be the trustee. Who is the person that is going to have the responsibility and the fiduciary duty to make distributions from the trust to the caregiver of the pet for that pet's, for that, what do I want to say? For that pet's, I'm reading and I'm losing my, for that pet's care. And so the trustee is going to make sure that the pet is delivered to the caretaker, and then the caretaker will show the trustee the various expenses that is associated with caring for the pet. So really we have three parties to this pet trust: the trustee who manages the money, the caretaker who cares for your pet, and the beneficiary who is actually the pet, or pets, plural. Okay, so let's move on to the next step, is determining the caregiver. After we decide who is the trustee, who is somebody that I can trust to manage the money, and maybe it's a friend or a family member, or perhaps it's what we call a corporate trustee or a professional fiduciary. And sometimes it makes sense, especially for, I have some clients who own horse farms and they're equestrians. And so you can imagine if something happened to them, they want to make sure that all of their horses are taken care of. And so that's a substantial amount of money. So maybe we consider a corporate trustee. And then the caregiver is a ranch of some sort, or another family member who owns a ranch. And so it's very important that you choose an appropriate caregiver for your pets. And so you want to make sure, number one, that you talk with your potential caregiver, that they're willing to accept your pet, right? That's the biggest, one of the biggest stumbling areas when we're sitting down with clients and we're talking about planning for pets. It's very important to talk about this with the people you nominate. We don't want any surprises once you pass away and the trustee now has the trust, and they go knocking on the caregiver's door and the caregiver doesn't know that they were nominated. That's a wow, surprise. So we want to make sure that we consider appropriate caregivers and we let them in on the plan. And we want to make sure that we think about caregivers in a way that they would be willing to provide similar care that you would provide for your own pet. And that should be a factor in the determination. Other factors of importance would be whether or not you want your caregiver to use a particular veterinarian, and that veterinarian's proximity to the caregiver. And then what about the type of residence that you want your pet to live in? Is your pet going to need some space to roam? Or if we have a couple of kitty cats, is an apartment sufficient? Right? I hope that makes sense. Obviously, we don't want to leave our horses to someone in a condo downtown Phoenix. Probably doesn't make a lot of sense. Okay, so moving on to the funding of the pet trust. And so this is where we designate in the trust how much money is going to be put into the pet trust. It can be a specific dollar amount, or it can be a percentage of the entire estate. And when I say estate, I mean all of your assets. Let's take your house, your bank accounts, your retirement funds, all of your assets. And when you die, those assets will be liquidated. And now it's going to be held in this trust pot. Well, do you want all of it to go to your pet trust? Or maybe you want just a portion of it? So the factors that may be considered in deciding how much money or other property to transfer is, again, the type of animal. Are we talking cats and dogs? Are we talking horses? Or perhaps you're a dog breeder, right? You have a lot of dogs, perhaps. You have and you have to plan for the appropriate not only caregiver for that, but the type of funding that you're going to want to consider is based on whether or not there's a breeding situation going on, the animal's life expectancy, again, the standard of living that you want your pet to be given. If I know with a lot of my breeders, it's very expensive. These veterinarian visits are very expensive for dog breeders. And then, of course, we want to talk about whether or not the trustee is going to be paid for his or her services. And here in Arizona, the laws state that a trustee is entitled to a reasonable compensation. And of course, you want your trustee to be paid because we want our trustee to do the job, right? We want our trustee to be on board with the plan. And so trustee is entitled to payment for his or her services. So adequate funds should also be included to provide your animal with proper care, be it an animal sitter, professional boarding business, when the caregiver is on vacation. So sometimes when we have kids, we leave them with mom and dad so we can take a vacation. Same thing with your caregiver. Your caregiver might need a break. So we want to make sure that there is funds available for the caregiver if they need to take a vacation. Moving on to your care directions. You can also leave instructions and examples about the types of concerns you have for the care of your pets. So that may be their food and their diet. What is their daily routine? It's hard to think about that if we pass away, our pets are now left behind without us. And we know just by going on vacation, if we have to board our pet, it's a traumatic experience for them. It truly is. And there's nothing like the feeling when you come back from vacation and you walk through the door and that animal, it's the animal's happiest day of their life when they see us return. And sadly, in this case, they won't see us return. But we want to make the transition for them as easy as and less traumatic as possible. So if we can give good instructions to our caregiver about their daily routine, the toys that they love, how are they groomed, the yard size, what kind of medical care, and then perhaps we want to talk about or think about how the trustee should monitor the caregiver's services. I want to say something about the trustee and the caregiver for a moment. They can actually be the same person. We don't have to make things overly complicated. You believe in your caregiver's ability to manage the money and you believe they'll do the right thing. They can own the same role. They can be the trustee and the caregiver. And it makes things pretty easy because they can dip into the trust whenever they need to. However, we are only human and we all have different skill sets. And some of us may not be so good with money. We have the pet's best interest at heart, but we may overspend. Our skill is to care for that animal, and someone else might be better suited to manage the money. So this is a conversation I have with all of my clients. Should the trustee and the caregiver be one and the same, or should we have two separate individuals, and should the trustee focus and monitor the caregiver's services? So I welcome any of your questions about that. Next, I want to move on to some real life examples. And yeah, these are a little out there, but we always love to use examples of the famous and the celebrities and the wealthy because they usually, even though they have tons of money, they don't make very good plans. And to this day, it perplexes me. It really does. To have billions of dollars in your estate and not put together an appropriate plan for your pets or your kids. It's baffling. This example, you may be familiar with Leona Helmsley. She was she had a nickname called the Queen of Mean, and she was a real estate mogul back in New York. And apparently she was a very nasty woman, very wealthy. She was very charitable. I know her and her husband had a charitable trust, but she was difficult, to say the least. I also think I read that she was found guilty of tax evasion. So she was just a tough character. And she decided that she was going to leave $12 million in a trust to her beloved Maltese named Trouble. I mean, talk about eccentric. Now, part of me says, you know what, sister? That's your money. Do with it what you may and what you will, and that's your decision. But, you know, there's another part of me that says we need to be smart about these things. So in any event, she did create a trust for Trouble, and a judge later ruled that $12 million was excessive, and he reduced the gift to $2 million. And so what I'll say about this is that the standard rule around trusts in general is that trusts have to serve a purpose. If they don't serve a purpose, then they're not going to be created. There's no need for them. But if they go beyond the purpose, they can also be reined in. The trust can be reined in. That is exactly what this judge determined, that the $12 million was just excessive. Yes, she can set up a trust for her pet, but $2 million serves the purpose that she intended. Therefore, it was reduced to $2 million. And Helmsley also wanted her dog to be buried with her upon its death. And New York said, no, we don't do that around here. And so it says here that Helmsley's brother was named as the caretaker for the dog, but he declined to act. So again, it's really important that when we put your plan in place, we have the conversation with your caretaker, that they're willing to take on the care of the pet, because here in this example, brother said no. Nonetheless, Trouble spent the last 5 years of her life being pampered at the Helmsley Sandcastle Hotel in Sarasota, Florida. So all's well that ends well. This is a recent story. I just did if you're into TikTok and Reels on Instagram, you can find this on our account. We just did a reel on this really cool story about this lady out of South Tampa, Florida, that had a horde of Persian cats. Cleopatra, Goldfinger, Leo, Midnight, Napoleon, Snowball, and Squeaky. How cute. She left them about $2.5 million in a trust. However, in her trust, she stated that the cats must remain living in the mansion. So there's the mansion in the trust for the cats, as well as the money to take care of the cats. What do you think about the trust purpose? Do you think that was necessary? Do you think that a $1 million mansion really serves or overserves the trust purpose? Well, the judge here felt as though that the house was too much and that the caretaker was not able to spend the time required to really care for the animals. The animals were alone the majority of the time. And that's not good for them, right? You can have somebody pop in and check on your animal, but we really don't want the cats alone in this mansion for the majority of their lives. So the probate judge decided that the caretaker checking on the cats only a few times a day did not really align with Nancy's intentions. And so the cats were eventually transferred to the Humane Society of Tampa Bay. where they are currently being placed for adoption just this past June. And I further read that if someone is willing to adopt these cats, they do get a slice of the trust pie to go along with it. So there's some incentive for you. But I thought that was an amazing story, and it's really amazing what these eccentric people will put in their trusts for their animals. So here are some legal considerations that we need to think about and discuss when we are planning for our pets. What if your nominated or declared caregiver can no longer care for your pet when the time comes? Well, that's a great question. Successor alternate caregivers. I always counsel my clients on the need to name not only one, but at least two people or parties who can be caregivers in case your first choice is unable or unwilling to serve as the caregiver. And so we certainly don't want your pet to end up not having a home. And so we want to consider naming a sanctuary or a no-kill shelter as a choice. And I can think of a pretty good one right now. All right. The next question: what happens if the trust runs out of property before my pet dies? So if there isn't any more money in the trust, the trustee doesn't have any money to pay for the pet's care, we hope that the caregiver will continue to do so with his or her own funds. And typically what I say to clients is, if you have a couple of dogs, maybe dogs can be a little bit more expensive, just to get them started, get their veterinarian care, make sure they have adequate food supply for maybe 6 months. But typically after that money runs out, the caregivers are more than willing to welcome those pets into their family and continue to care for them. So it's not something to be too stressed out about for your typical family pets. The caregiver will certainly almost always take on that burden of financial care. But in the instance the caregiver decides they're unwilling or unable to continue to care for the pet if the trust runs out of money, we always want to name another person or an organization who we can send the pet to. Okay. So that is the short and sweet version of estate planning for your pets. And so I want to thank you very much for allowing me to present this to you this evening. And we take this work very seriously. A lot of people, when they come into our office and talk to us about estate planning, part of our consultation involves questions about pets. It is a question I always ask, and I get a lot of chuckles, and I get a lot of, yeah, we have pets, so what? Well, ultimately, it is your decision on how you treat your pet and the care for your pet later on after you have passed away. But I just want to say that we take it seriously. And so we are always here to answer your questions. Feel free to reach out to me. My phone number is here on the slide. And you can email support@themindfulcounsel.com. If you type in The Mindful Counsel on Facebook and Instagram, you'll find us there as well. And so we would be delighted to answer any questions you have. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And I just wanted to add that I decided to reach out to Elisabeth because after kind of reviewing and researching for estate planning attorneys in general, she was the only one whose website had a pet planning tab on there with content. So I do really believe that she consults her clients very well in that particular area. I did want to add also, for Foothills Animal Rescue, we do have a pet legacy program that guarantees Yeah, that guarantees intake for Foothills Animal, for your pets to be intaken to Foothills Animal Rescue for care to be rehomed. We do not act as a trustee in any pet trust, but we will accept residual beneficiary. We will be a residual beneficiary of a pet trust, or can act as a I shouldn't say act as a fiduciary, because we won't we won't be able to do that. But that we can help kind of coordinate and talk through what that might look like for Foothills Animal Rescue to care for your animal. So if you have questions about that, please feel free to also contact me or Shannon about at Foothills Animal Rescue about our pet legacy program, very specifically, where we do go over pet care plans and what the minimum outright donation is required for us to guarantee intake. There's a lot more nuanced conversations that happen when it comes to pet planning. So again, alongside Elisabeth and Foothills Animal Rescue, if you have questions about that, we are more than happy to help answer. Any questions that I can't answer, I would refer out to Elisabeth or your estate planning attorney. But it's always good to understand that pets are considered an asset in the state of Arizona, and that you do need to plan for them just as you would for your car or your house. So that being said, I do have questions for you, Elisabeth, while we still have you on here. Does a pet trust cover incapacity?
So yes, so the pet trust, that's a good question. That's a good question. The pet trust itself is created upon your death. However, the most pet trusts are created inside of a family trust or a living trust. I don't want to get too in the weeds here, but the short answer is yes, we can create a trust so that upon your disability or incapacity, even if it's just temporary, the trustee of the pet trust can step up and start to take funds and care for the animals, along with all of your other assets and your kids. So yes, and bravo to whoever asked that question. That's very good. Yes.
That was my question.
Okay, that figures.
And then so does the caregiver in a pet trust have the right to rehome if funds are exhausted?
Yes, if we specifically state that, yes.
Okay.
And we should. The default in my practice is to always state to rehome where a particular organization or another individual. Yes.
Great. And in what situation, you mentioned that there was a trust that went into probate for the Florida situation.
Yes.
In what situation, because from my understanding, trusts avoid the probate process. So in what situation, how would a trust get into probate court?
Great question. So a couple of reasons. Just because you create a trust doesn't mean it avoids probate. First of all, what has to be done is we create the trust. The trust itself is merely a set of instructions. It's a set of directions that we leave behind. In order for the trust to avoid probate, we then have to take all of your assets and we have to title your assets and add the trust as the beneficiary on your assets.
Right.
That's another very convoluted,
yes.
Right? If that isn't done, the trust goes into probate. Now, but in this situation, what I think happened is the nominated trustee or the caregiver went to an attorney and said, we can't have cats living in this house. This is too much money going on for these cats. So what they did is they went to their probate court and they filed, not a complaint, but they filed some type of a litigation asking for the court to help them with the situation.
Got it.
So the trustee or the caregiver would have had to have initiated that court litigation, or that they're looking for an answer. They're looking for the court's directive. And sometimes that happens with trusts. If the beneficiaries aren't getting along, they need help and they need someone to help them make a decision. And that's what happens. It ends up in court.
Interesting. Good to know.
Yeah.
And then that led me to the question of, so when it is too much money, is there a is there kind of like a standard practice of or an equation to approximate how much funds really needs to be in a pet trust?
Yeah, great question. So we have to do some math sometimes. So the factors that we weigh are the type of animal. We look at the expenses of those animals over the previous years. And we also look and consider the life expectancy of the animal. So by using those factors, we kind of guesstimate what would, if we have a life expectancy of maybe 5 more years, what does 5 years of expenses look like for this animal, right? And then designate that portion or that specific amount to the trust. And then, of course, we add provisions that say if the animals pass away and there's any money left over in the trust, now what happens to it? Does it go down to my kids? Does it go to a charity? So yes, we do need to calculate some life expectancy and the expenses of the pet.
Awesome. I think that's all. I was writing up questions, but I think I hit them all. But I did want to make sure to say thank you again and open it up to anybody else who may have any remaining questions.
We had one question that someone had asked before. I believe you mentioned it, but I want to remind people of the name. So the question asked, can the pets be willed to someone else because the primary person is the best candidate but unable to provide pet care? So I believe you had a secondary name for that. What was it again? And are there any restrictions? Can you have an infinite number of next people in line?
So yes, let me make sure I understand the question. Are we talking about, can we leave our pet to the caregiver, to a person to care for that pet, even if that person can't financially manage the pet?
I think it's asking like if you can will them to a different person than who you've primarily named as the caregiver. So you mentioned something like a secondary.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you certainly choose your first caregiver, and if that person is unable, then absolutely, we always want to name an alternate, a successor. And if you want to name a second, a third, we might be getting a little bit too crazy at 4 or 5, but yes, I absolutely would support that. Naming 2 or 3 backups, 100%.
Great.
Excellent questions.
Anything else before we hop off? If not, so what's going to happen is this is a recording that will be sent out. I'll send it to our volunteer base. Elisabeth, I'll send the link to you as well. Along with when I send it out to our volunteers, I'll add your info, where to find you, all that good stuff. If you have any documents or flyers or anything you'd like to send out to them too, please forward that my way. I put in your next cafe series in the chat. I don't think the recording will go out before
that's tomorrow.
Tomorrow, yeah. But we'll see if anyone wants to hop into that tomorrow that was here. But yeah, thank you so much. I learned a lot for sure. So this is great.
Thank you so very much.
And Elisabeth, I believe we will upload it on YouTube, on our YouTube channel as well.
Great, excellent. That's perfect.
So we'll have the recording up and available for anybody to listen to.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I'll be in touch.
Okay, sounds good.
Sounds
Thank
good.
you very much. Have a good night, everybody.
Bye.
Have a great night.